Long before cities rose from the ground, before kings wore crowns, and before history had names for itself, humans lived in a world that was quiet, wide, and uncertain. There were no borders, no calendars, no written memories, only land, sky, animals, and time. Small groups of humans moved slowly across open plains and forests, following the seasons, following food, and following instinct. Life was not about progress, it was about survival. Fire was more than warmth, it was safe, a flickering circle of light in the darkness, where stories were not told with words, but with gestures and silence. Days passed without numbers, years passed without meaning. Children learned by watching. Elders remembered paths, not dates. There was no future to plan, only tomorrow to reach. In this world, humans did not control nature. They listened to it, they feared it, they respected it. Every sound mattered. Every shadow could mean danger. Every sunrise was a quiet relief. And yet, something was slowly changing. Not in tools, not in strength, but in thought. Humans began to notice patterns, the movement of stars, the return of animals, the rhythm of life itself. Without knowing it, without intending to, they were preparing for something larger. This was not the beginning of civilization. This was the moment before it, a long breath before humanity took its first step forward. After countless generations of wandering, the world had not grown kinder to humans. The land was still vast and unpredictable, the weather still unforgiving, and danger still present in every shadow. Survival required constant attention. Yet beneath this harsh reality, something subtle but permanent was beginning to take shape, not in the environment itself, but in the way humans responded to it. Fire entered human life slowly, not as a sudden discovery, but as a force observed from a distance. Lightning would strike dry trees, flames would spread across open land, and entire areas would be transformed within moments. To early humans, fire was terrifying. It destroyed shelters, frightened animals, and made familiar landscapes unrecognizable. For a long time, fire was something to escape from, not approach. But fear alone never defines the human response. Over time, humans noticed that fire also carried warmth, light, and protection. Nights near the fire felt different. Predators stayed farther away. The cold became more bearable. Darkness no longer felt absolute. These small observations mattered because they changed how humans behaved. At first, humans did not create fire, they protected it. A burning branch taken from a natural fire could be carried carefully, guarded through the night, and fed slowly with dry wood. Keeping fire alive required memory, patience, and cooperation. Someone had to watch it, someone had to feed it, someone had to protect it from wind and rain. Fire demanded attention, and in return, it gave time. With fire, the human day grew longer. Night was no longer a signal to hide or sleep immediately. Around the soft glow of flames, people gathered, rested, and waited. Shadows moved across cave walls and open ground, creating a quiet space where nothing urgent needed to happen. This unstructured time allowed something new to emerge, thought without immediate danger.
Fire changed food as well. Meat cooked over flames became easier to chew and digest. Roots and plants that were once inedible became nourishing. Hunger eased more slowly, and energy lasted longer. Over many generations, human bodies adapted to this change. With better nutrition came subtle shifts in strength, endurance, and brain development. Fire did not make humans intelligent overnight, but it created conditions where change became possible. As fire brought people together, learning became shared. Knowledge was no longer something discovered alone. People watched each other, they copied movements, they remembered what worked and avoided what failed. Survival slowly became less random. While fire reshaped nights, stone reshaped hands. The first tools were not designed with intention. They were discovered by chance. A rock breaking in the right way, a sharp edge forming unexpectedly. At first, these objects were noticed, then reused. Over time, humans began repeating the actions that produced useful results. Stone was struck against stone. Shapes were tested. Hands learned precise movements. Tools became more reliable. A sharp edge could cut meat cleanly. A pointed stone could pierce the hide. These tools reduced effort and increased efficiency, giving humans an advantage that had nothing to do with size or strength. What mattered most was not the tool itself, but the memory behind it. Humans remembered how to make tools. They showed others. Adults guided children through observation and repetition. This was teaching in its earliest form. Knowledge moved beyond a single lifetime and began to accumulate. Tools became physical memory. A stone blade carried information forward even after its maker was gone. Each generation started slightly ahead of the one before, not because the world changed, but because humans remembered more. With tools came planning. Hunting became coordinated. Movement became intentional. Humans began anticipating outcomes before acting. This shift required imagination, the ability to picture a result before it existed. Imagination quietly strengthened curiosity. Curiosity did not appear as spoken questions. It appeared as attention. Humans noticed patterns in animal behavior, seasonal changes, and the movement of the sky. They observed that stars returned to the same places and that the moon followed a cycle. These observations did not create science, but they created awareness. The world felt less chaotic and more structured.
Communication evolved alongside curiosity. Gestures gained meaning, sounds became consistent, repetition created understanding. Language was not yet formed, but connection deepened. Humans were not telling history, they were navigating reality together. Shelter improved gradually. Simple coverings protected against wind and rain. Animal skins provided warmth. Humans began choosing locations deliberately, favoring places that offered safety, water, and familiarity. Movement slowed, guided by memory rather than instinct alone. Children grew up watching adults shape their surroundings. They learned that effort could influence outcome. This belief, more than any tool or fire, changed humanity's path. Once humans understood that the world could be shaped, even slightly, experimentation followed. Each generation carried forward a bit more understanding. Not enough to transform the world, but enough to transform themselves. Fire burned steadily through the night. Tools rested in practiced hands. Curiosity stayed awake. Humanity was no longer only surviving, it was learning. And learning, once begun, would never truly stop.
For most of early human existence, movement was not a decision, but a requirement. Humans followed animals across open land, searched for edible plants, and adjusted constantly to changing seasons. Staying in one place too long often meant hunger, exposure, or danger. Wandering was not freedom, it was necessity. Life depended on knowing when to leave and where to go next. Over time, however, humans began to notice something subtle. Not every place was equal. Some locations offered water year after year. Certain valleys provided protection from harsh winds. Some areas attracted animals regularly and supported plant growth more reliably than others. These observations did not immediately change human behavior, but they stayed in memory. At first, humans simply returned to these places more often. Camps that were once used briefly began to host longer stays. Fires were kept alive instead of abandoned. Simple shelters were repaired rather than rebuilt from nothing.
Tools were left behind intentionally, waiting for the group's return. The land slowly became familiar. Familiarity reduced uncertainty, and reduced uncertainty changed decisions. As groups stayed longer, they began to notice the land more closely. They observed when plants grew, when animals passed through, and how weather patterns affected the environment. Memory turned into expectation. Humans began to anticipate what would happen next, rather than simply reacting to what was happening now. One of the most important observations was quiet and easy to overlook. Humans noticed that plants often returned to the same places. Seeds dropped near camps sometimes grew into familiar plants. This did not immediately create farming, it created awareness. People remembered where food appeared before and returned to those locations deliberately. Over time, seeds were placed intentionally in the ground. Not everywhere and not with certainty. Results were slow and inconsistent. Sometimes nothing happened, sometimes growth surprised them. This process required patience, observation, and memory across seasons. It was experimentation guided by attention rather than planning. When plants grew where seeds had been placed, humans experienced something entirely new. Food became predictable, not guaranteed, but expected. This expectation reshaped human behavior. Staying in one place now had value beyond temporary shelter. Humans remained longer to protect what they had started. The movement did not disappear, but it changed. Humans traveled with intention rather than desperation. They returned to places they knew. Wandering became selective instead of constant. Settling brought new challenges. Crops could fail. Weather could destroy months of effort. Stored food attracted animals and insects. Living close together allowed illness to spread more easily. In many cases, early settled life was harder than wandering. Work increased. Risk changed shape. Yet humans continued to settle. They continued because settlement offered continuity. Children grew up in the same places their parents had known. Knowledge became tied to specific land. Humans learned which soil held moisture, which seasons were reliable, and which signs warned of danger. Memory deepened in ways wandering never allowed. Shelters evolved. Temporary coverings became sturdier structures meant to last longer. Walls offered protection. Roofs provided insulation. Storage areas appeared for food and tools. Daily activities followed patterns. Work happened at certain times. Rest followed a rhythm. Time became structured. With structure came roles. Some people focused on planting and gathering. Others hunted, built, or protected the group. These roles were not fixed, but they were recognizable. Cooperation became essential. Decisions now affected many people, not just individuals. Leadership emerged naturally. Those with experience, memory, and understanding guided others. Authority was not formal, but influence grew around knowledge. Elders mattered because they remembered more. Settled life changed how humans thought about the future. Wandering demanded focus on the present moment. Settling required thinking months ahead. Seeds planted now would feed people later. Shelters built today would protect others tomorrow. Planning became necessary. Imagination expanded. Humans pictured outcomes that did not yet exist. They prepared for scarcity. They adapted to loss. This forward-thinking mindset reshaped human psychology.
As settlements grew more stable, villages began to form. These were not cities, but clusters of human life tied to specific places. Fires burned in consistent locations. Paths connected shelters, water sources, and fields. Familiarity replaced constant uncertainty. Villages were fragile. A single drought, flood, or disease could undo years of effort. Yet humans rebuilt them repeatedly. Attachment to place had taken hold. The land was no longer just used, it was known.
Living close together intensified relationships. Cooperation deepened, but conflict became unavoidable. Disagreements required resolution. Shared expectations formed. Customs emerged. These rules were not written, but they were understood. Beliefs also began to change. The land that provided food felt powerful. Seasonal cycles gained meaning. Certain places felt special. Humans did not yet form organized religion, but reverence appeared naturally. The environment was no longer just background, it was central to survival and identity. Settled life demanded more effort than wandering, but it offered something new: stability. Humans accepted increased work in exchange for continuity. Children inherited not just skills, but place-based knowledge. Stories became tied to land. Identity slowly formed. Not all humans settled at once. Some groups continued wandering. Others settled temporarily and moved again. Humanity experimented with different ways of living, learning through success and failure. But the direction was clear. Once humans discovered that staying could create continuity, there was no full return to endless wandering. Settlement opened a door that could not be closed. Villages laid the foundation for larger societies, more complex relationships, and deeper systems of belief and control. Humanity has learned to stay, and staying would change everything that followed. When humans first began to settle in one place, farming did not appear as a clear plan or a bold decision. It emerged slowly through observation, repetition, and necessity. Early humans did not wake up one day and decide to become farmers. Instead, they experimented quietly with the land around them, learning what grew, when it grew, and how fragile that growth could be. In the earliest stages, farming felt uncertain and unreliable. Seeds placed in the ground often failed. Weather patterns were unpredictable. Floods, droughts, insects, and animals destroyed crops without warning. Early farming demanded patience without guarantees. Many seasons ended in disappointment, and hunger remained a constant threat. Yet humans continued to plant. They continued because farming offered something wandering never could: the possibility of control. For the first time, humans were not only reacting to nature, they were attempting to guide it. Even small successes reinforced this behavior. A patch of land that produced food one season was remembered and reused. Knowledge accumulated slowly, tied to specific places and conditions. Before farming, humans adapted themselves to the land. With farming, they began reshaping the land to suit human needs. Trees were cleared, grasslands were altered. Soil was broken open and exposed. Water sources were redirected. The environment slowly changed under sustained human effort. This transformation came with costs. Farming required constant labor. Fields needed regular attention. Weeds competed with crops. Animals had to be driven away. Timing became critical. Missing a planting window or a harvest season could mean starvation. Life became tightly bound to cycles that demanded precision. Early farmers worked harder than their wandering ancestors. Their movements became repetitive. Their days were longer and more structured. Their bodies showed signs of strain. Yet they stayed because farming created surplus. Surplus changed everything. When food could be produced in excess and stored, humans no longer lived meal to meal. Grain could be dried and saved. Roots could be preserved. This surplus provided security during lean times, but it also introduced imbalance. Not everyone controlled stored food equally. Some people guarded it, others depended on it. For the first time, inequality emerged in a visible and lasting way. With surplus came population growth. More children survived into adulthood. Settlements expanded. Villages became denser. More people depended on the same land. This increased pressure on resources and intensified the need for organization. Social structures became more complex. Roles that were once flexible began to solidify. Some people farmed full-time. Others focused on tool-making, building, or storage. Leadership became more permanent. Decisions affected entire communities rather than small groups. Farming also altered human diets. Early agricultural diets relied heavily on a few staple crops. Compared to the varied foods of hunter-gatherers, this diet was less diverse. Nutritional deficiencies appeared. Teeth weakened. Bones showed signs of stress. Disease spreads more easily in dense populations. Life expectancy did not immediately improve. In many places, it declined.
Yet farming spread. It spread because it allowed humans to stay in one place. Stability, even difficult stability, replaced constant movement. Land became valuable in new ways. Fields represented months of labor and years of memory. Ownership, though informal at first, became important. Boundaries formed. Protecting land became essential. Conflict increased. Where wandering groups could avoid each other, farming communities could not move easily. Disputes over fertile land became common. Violence shifted from survival-based encounters to organized defense and control. War took on new meaning. Farming tied human life to time more rigidly than ever before. Seasons governed behavior. Planting, waiting, and harvesting defined the year. Calendars emerged from necessity. Humans tracked days, moons, and weather patterns with growing accuracy. Belief systems evolved alongside farming. Weather became a matter of survival. Rain meant life. Drought meant death. Humans began attributing meaning to forces they could not control. Rituals formed. Offerings were made. Early deities were often associated with fertility, land, rain, and the sun. These beliefs provided comfort and structure in an uncertain world. Farming also reshaped family structures. Inheritance became important. Land, tools, and stored food passed from one generation to the next. Lineage gained significance. Identity became rooted in ancestry and place rather than movement. As villages grew, they transformed into towns. Storage buildings became central. Walls were constructed for protection. Trade expanded. Excess food could be exchanged for tools, labor, or protection. Specialization increased, as some people no longer produced food directly. This specialization layered society. Those who controlled food storage, land, or protection gained power. Hierarchies formed. Inequality became institutionalized. Social mobility decreased. Humans who once lived relatively equal lives now occupied clearly defined positions. Farming laid the foundation for civilization, but also for tension, conflict, and control. The relationship between humans and nature changed permanently. Nature was no longer only observed, it was managed, exploited, and reshaped. Over time, soil exhaustion appeared. Over-farming reduced fertility. Humans were forced to innovate, expand, or move. Despite these challenges, farming continued to spread across regions. Different crops shaped different societies. Wheat and barley supported early civilizations in fertile valleys. Rice transformed river-based cultures. Maize reshaped entire continents. Geography and agriculture became inseparable. Culture emerged from these connections. Traditions formed around planting and harvest. Festivals marked seasonal transitions. Stories explained abundance and failure. Myth and memory intertwined with daily survival. Farming accelerated technological development. Tools improved. Irrigation systems expanded. Storage methods evolved. Measurement became essential. Humans needed consistent ways to track land, grain, and labor. Early systems of counting and record-keeping emerged. These systems would eventually lead to writing.
But farming's most profound impact was psychological. Humans began to think of the future as something that could be planned. The present became preparation. Life became investment. Patience became a survival skill. Decisions made today affected outcomes months or years later. At the same time, anxiety increased. A single bad harvest could destroy an entire community. Dependence replaced flexibility. Humans became locked into systems that were difficult to escape. Farming offered stability, but demanded commitment. There was no simple return to wandering. Once humans depended on fields, storage, and cycles, movement became costly. The systems they built required maintenance. Settlements required defense. Social structures required order. Humanity has crossed a threshold. Farming was not simply progress, it was a trade. Humans traded freedom of movement for stability, diversity for surplus, equality for growth. The world became more productive, but also more fragile. Cities, empires, religion, and industry would all grow from this single transformation. Farming changed everything, and not always for the better.
As farming became more stable and humans remained in one place for longer periods, something quietly transformed the nature of human life. Settlements were no longer temporary solutions to survival. They became shared spaces where multiple families lived side by side, season after season. Over time, these clusters of shelters evolved into villages, and villages became the foundation of human society. Living together changed everything. When humans lived in small, mobile groups, relationships were simple and flexible. People could leave if conflict arose. Disagreements rarely lasted long because movement provided escape. But in settled communities, people could not simply walk away. Fields needed tending, homes needed maintenance, children needed stability. Staying together became necessary, even when it was difficult. This closeness forced humans to develop new ways of living together. Villages grew gradually. A few families became many. Shelters multiplied. Paths formed naturally between homes, water sources, storage areas, and fields. Daily life became shared. Sounds of work, cooking, and conversation filled the same spaces again and again. Familiarity replaced anonymity. As villages expanded, humans began to recognize themselves as part of a group larger than immediate family. Identity shifted. People were no longer defined only by blood relations, but by belonging. This sense of belonging marked the beginning of tribes. Tribes were not political entities at first. They were social bonds built through shared land, shared labor, and shared memory. People worked the same fields, defended the same territory, and depended on the same resources. Over time, these shared experiences created loyalty. With loyalty came expectation. Humans began to expect certain behaviors from one another. Cooperation was no longer optional. Fields needed planting. Harvests required many hands. Protection demanded coordination. Individuals who consistently refused to contribute threatened the survival of everyone. This is where the first social rules emerged. These rules were not written, they were understood. They existed as shared agreements shaped by necessity. Work together, share food in times of scarcity, protect children, respect elders. These expectations formed naturally as communities tried to survive together. Elders played a crucial role in this process. They carried memories. They remembered seasons of famine, floods, and conflict. Their experience gave them influence. Leadership was not enforced through violence, but through trust and knowledge. Elders advised when to plant, when to move animals, and how to respond to threats. Over time, leadership became more defined. Certain individuals guided decisions more often than others. This guidance was situational at first, but gradually became consistent.
Authority formed not because people wanted power, but because groups needed direction.
As villages grew, specialization increased. Some people focused on farming, others built shelters, crafted tools, or protected the settlement. These roles improved efficiency but also introduced dependency. Individuals relied on one another more than ever before. Dependency deepened social bonds but also created vulnerability. If one group failed, others suffered. This interconnection made cooperation essential and conflict dangerous. Disputes over food, labor, or land threatened stability. To manage these tensions, communities developed customs. Customs defined acceptable behavior. They explained how disputes should be resolved, how resources should be shared, and how responsibility should be distributed. These customs were enforced through social pressure rather than force. Shame, reputation, and belonging became powerful tools. Punishment was rarely physical at first. Exclusion mattered more. To be pushed outside the group meant isolation and danger. Fear of exclusion encouraged conformity. As tribes stabilized, boundaries formed. Land that supported a community became recognized as belonging to that group. These boundaries were not precise, but they were understood. Crossing them without permission caused tension. Territory became identity. Neighboring tribes interacted in complex ways. Sometimes they traded, sometimes they shared knowledge, sometimes they fought. Relationships depended on resources, history, and memory. Alliances formed and dissolved over time. Trade expanded as villages produced surplus. Extra grain, tools, or crafted goods could be exchanged for materials not found locally. Trade strengthened connections between groups, but also introduced comparison. Differences in wealth became visible. With comparison came hierarchy. Some families controlled more land, some stored more food, some held leadership roles across generations. Over time, these differences solidified. Status became inherited. Equality faded slowly, replaced by structured inequality. Belief systems evolved alongside social rules. As communities depended heavily on land, weather, and cycles, humans searched for meaning in forces beyond their control. Natural events felt intentional. Droughts felt like punishment. Abundance felt like a reward. Spiritual ideas emerged to explain these patterns. Certain rituals were believed to influence success. Offerings were made. Ceremonies marked planting and harvest. These shared beliefs reinforced unity and obedience. Religion, in its earliest form, became a social glue. Myths explained origins. Stories passed down lessons. Morality became intertwined with belief. To break social rules was not only to disrupt the group, but to offend unseen forces. As tribes grew larger, conflict became more organized. Defense strategies formed. Watchpoints were established. Weapons improved. Violence became structured rather than spontaneous. War changed from survival encounters into planned action. Tribes fought to defend territory, resources, and honor. Victory meant expansion. Defeat meant loss of land or absorption into another group. Despite conflict, cooperation remained the foundation of village life. Shared work sustained daily survival. Festivals celebrated harvests. Storytelling preserved memories. Music and rhythm strengthened connection. Children grew up surrounded by consistent social structures. They learned rules through observation and repetition. Identity became inherited. A child belonged to a place, a tribe, and a story. Education was informal but constant. Skills were passed down. Values were reinforced. History lived in memory rather than records. Villages became increasingly complex. Storage areas expanded. Public spaces formed. Meeting places emerged where decisions were discussed.
collective responsibility deepened. Over generations, tribes became stable societies. They developed shared language, symbols, and traditions. These cultural elements distinguished one group from another. Identity hardened. Humans were no longer simply surviving together. They were organizing life. This organization came with cost. Individual freedom diminished. Social pressure increased. Deviating from norms became risky. Creativity existed, but within boundaries. Yet organization also allowed growth. Larger populations could be supported. Knowledge accumulated. Infrastructure improved. Humans could build, plan, and remember at scale. Villages were not yet cities. Tribes were not yet nations, but the foundation was laid. Social rules, once informal, became expected. Authority became accepted. Inequality became normalized. Belief became institutional. Human society had crossed another threshold, from small, flexible groups to structured communities bound by land, rules, and identity. The world had become shared, and once shared, it could no longer return to simplicity. As human communities grew larger and more complex, survival was no longer only a physical challenge. People had learned to farm, to settle, and to live together under shared rules. Yet beneath this growing structure remained uncertainty. Crops still failed. Illness still appeared without warning. Floods, droughts, storms, and death arrived without explanation. The world felt ordered in some ways, but frighteningly unpredictable in others. Humans needed meaning. Not meaning in a philosophical sense, but meaning that could reduce fear. They needed explanations that made the uncontrollable feel understandable, and rituals that made uncertainty feel manageable. This need did not arise from imagination alone. It arose from anxiety. Early humans noticed patterns everywhere. The sun rose and fell reliably. The moon changed shape but always returned. Seasons followed cycles. Life appeared to move according to invisible rules. If some things followed order, perhaps everything did. And if everything followed order, perhaps that order came from somewhere. This is where belief began, not suddenly and not intentionally. Belief emerged slowly, shaped by daily life and repeated experience. Humans began to associate events with causes, even when those causes could not be seen. A good harvest after a ritual felt connected. A drought after conflict felt meaningful. Coincidence became the explanation. Natural forces took on personality. Rain was no longer just water from the sky. It became generosity or punishment. The sun became more than warmth. It became life itself. Rivers were no longer just flowing water. They were providers, protectors, or destroyers. The natural world felt alive, responsive, and aware. These ideas were not abstract. They were deeply practical. If rain could be influenced, it had to be respected. If the land could be angered, it had to be appeased. Rituals emerged as a way to interact with these forces. At first, rituals were simple. Repeated actions performed before planting, offerings left near water or trees, gestures meant to show gratitude or request protection. These acts did not guarantee success, but they provided comfort. They gave humans a sense of participation rather than helplessness. Over time, stories formed around these practices. Humans began telling narratives to explain why the world behaved as it did. These stories were passed orally, shaped by memory and imagination. They explained where humans came from, why suffering existed, and what happened after death. Myth became the language of understanding. Myths did not need to be accurate, they needed to be believable. A believable story reduced fear. It provided structure. It gave reason to follow rules and perform rituals. It explained why certain behaviors were rewarded and others punished. Morality slowly became tied to belief. As villages grew into tribes, shared belief became essential. Belief unified people who were not related by blood. It created identity beyond family. To believe the same story was to belong to the same group. Shared belief strengthened cooperation. If everyone believed that breaking a rule angered unseen forces, obedience became easier to enforce. If everyone believed that ancestors watched from beyond, respect for elders increased. Belief became a tool of social stability, even when no one recognized it as such. Gods emerged gradually. They were not originally distant or abstract. Early gods were closely tied to daily life. A god of rain, a spirit of fertility, a guardian of the harvest. These entities were local, specific, and deeply connected to survival. Different communities developed different beliefs based on their environment. River-based societies focused on water deities. Agricultural societies emphasized fertility and land. Nomadic groups believed in spirits of movement and sky. Geography shaped theology. Over time, these beliefs became more structured. Rituals grew more formal. Certain individuals became specialists in communicating with the unseen. Shamans, priests, and spiritual leaders emerged, not through force, but through perceived connection to the sacred. These individuals gained influence. They interpreted signs. They led ceremonies. They explained disasters. Their words shaped behavior. Spiritual authority became social power. This power was rarely questioned at first. When outcomes were uncertain, confidence was persuasive. A ritual that appeared to work reinforced belief. When it failed, explanations adapted. Gods were displeased. Rituals were performed incorrectly. Faith absorbed failure. Belief systems became resilient. Myths grew more complex. Stories linked gods to human origins. Lineage became divine. Leaders claimed connection to sacred forces. Authority became justified through belief rather than strength alone. This was a turning point. Religion began to reinforce hierarchy. Those closest to the gods gained status. Those who controlled rituals gained influence. Over generations, spiritual authority became institutional. Temples were built. Sacred spaces were protected. Offerings were collected. Religion became organized. With organization came consistency. Beliefs were repeated, preserved, and enforced. Deviation became dangerous. To question belief was to threaten unity. Faith became an obligation. Yet belief also provided comfort. In a world filled with suffering, belief explained pain. Death became a transition rather than ending. Ancestors lived on. The afterlife promised justice when the world did not. Hope softened hardship. Funeral rituals emerged. Burial practices reflected belief in continuation. Care for the dead reinforced care for the living. Memory became sacred. Belief also shaped time. Festivals marked cycles. Sacred calendars organized the year. Ritual days structured work and rest. Time gained spiritual meaning. Art flourished within belief systems. Symbols, carvings, and early monuments reflected sacred stories. Creativity became devotion. Beauty became an offering. Music and rhythm played a role. Chanting unified groups. Repetition created trance-like focus. Emotion deepened belief. Belief systems strengthened identity. To belong to a tribe was to believe its stories, follow its rituals, and respect its gods. Outsiders believed differently. The difference became distance. Belief separated groups as much as it united them. Conflict gained new dimensions. Wars were no longer only about land or resources. They became struggles between beliefs. Victories were seen as divine favor, defeats as punishment. Religion justified expansion and violence. Yet belief also limited destruction. Shared gods sometimes created alliances. Oaths were sworn by sacred forces. Trust formed through mutual faith. As societies grew larger, belief systems adapted. Gods merged. Pantheons formed. Hierarchies of deities reflected social hierarchies. Supreme gods emerged, ruling over others. Belief systems became mirrors of society. As power centralized, so did religion. Kings ruled by divine right. Laws were framed as sacred. Disobedience became sin. Religion preserved knowledge. Oral traditions carried history, values, and warnings. Before writing, belief systems stored memory. But belief also resisted change. New ideas threatened old stories. Progress clashed with tradition. Tension grew between innovation and faith. Despite this tension, belief persisted, because belief answered questions that knowledge could not yet explain. Why storms came? Why did the children die? Why life felt unfair? Religion filled gaps in understanding. Humans did not invent gods out of ignorance. They invented them out of need. The need to belong, the need to explain, the need to hope. As humanity continued to grow, belief systems would evolve again. Some would fade, others would dominate. New interpretations would replace old ones, but the foundation remained the same. Shared belief transformed human groups into societies. It created unity, order, comfort, and control. It shaped morality, identity, and power. Gods and myths were not separate from humanity. They were reflections of it. And once belief became shared, structured, and inherited, it became one of the most powerful forces in human history. As villages expanded and belief systems grew more structured, human communities reached a point where simple cooperation was no longer enough. The number of people living together increased beyond what memory and informal rules alone could manage. Fields stretched farther, trade routes grew longer, conflicts became more complex. Slowly, almost inevitably, villages transformed into something new. They became cities. The earliest cities did not appear suddenly, nor were they planned with clear intention. They formed where resources concentrated and movement converged. River valleys, fertile plains, and coastal areas drew people together again and again. Over time, temporary settlements became permanent centers of human life. Cities were not defined by buildings alone. They were defined by density. Thousands of people living in close proximity required new systems of organization. Food had to be stored, distributed, and protected. Water had to be managed. Waste had to be removed. Space had to be controlled. What once worked for small communities no longer scaled. This pressure forced innovation. Central storage facilities emerged, holding surplus grain and resources. These storage centers became the heart of cities. Whoever controlled them held influence. Power shifted from shared cooperation to centralized authority. This was the birth of political power. At first, authority rested with those who organized survival. Individuals who coordinated irrigation, managed storage, or led defense naturally gained influence. Their role was practical, not symbolic. They solved problems that affected everyone. Over time, these roles became permanent. Leadership stopped being temporary and situational. It became inherited or assigned. Families held positions across generations. Authority no longer depended solely on skill or memory, but on status. Power concentrated. Cities required enforcement. With so many people living together, social pressure alone could not prevent conflict. Rules had to be formalized. Punishment had to be predictable. This led to the creation of laws. Early laws were simple but strict. They defined ownership, responsibility, and consequence. Stealing grain, damaging irrigation, or disobeying authority threatened the entire city. Punishment was not just correction, it was deterrence. Justice became institutional. With law came bureaucracy. Records were needed to track resources, labor, and obligations. Counting and measurement became essential. This necessity would soon give rise to writing, but even before formal writing, symbols and markers tracked information. Cities transformed time. Daily life followed schedules. Work was divided by task and season. Labor became organized. Some people farmed, others built, others defended, governed, or worshipped. Specialization intensified. This specialization made cities powerful. Not everyone needed to produce food. Craftsmen refined tools. Builders created lasting structures. Traders moved goods across regions. Knowledge accumulated in specific roles rather than dispersed evenly. With specialization came dependency. Urban life requires trust in systems rather than individuals. People depended on strangers for food, water, and safety. This dependence made authority unavoidable. Religion adapted to urban life as well. Temples became central structures, both spiritually and politically. Gods were no longer only forces of nature, they became protectors of cities and legitimizers of rulers. Priests worked alongside leaders. Ritual reinforced obedience. Belief justified hierarchy. Kings emerged. Early kings were not absolute rulers at first. They were coordinators of labor, defense, and ritual. Over time, their authority expanded. Kings claimed divine favor. Power became sacred. Cities grew walls. Defense was essential. Cities represented concentrated wealth and resources. They attracted trade, but also violence. Walls protected people, grain, and power. Warfare became organized, strategic, and continuous. Unlike earlier conflicts, city warfare was not brief. It involved planning, alliances, and long-term consequences. Armies formed. Weapons improved. Victory meant expansion. Defeat meant loss of autonomy. Empires began as cities that learned to dominate others. Trade flourished in cities. Markets emerged. Goods moved across long distances. Metals, textiles, spices, and ideas traveled between cultures. Cities became nodes of connection. Trade also spreads inequality. Wealth accumulated unevenly. Merchant classes emerged. Economic power joined political and religious power. Class divisions deepened. Social mobility narrowed. Urban life changed human psychology. Privacy diminished. Noise increased. Crowds became normal. Identity shifted again. People defined themselves by occupation, status, and allegiance rather than family alone. Cities created opportunity and alienation simultaneously. Art and architecture reflected power. Monumental buildings displayed authority and belief. Temples, palaces, and walls symbolized permanence. Humans began building for legacy rather than necessity. Writing emerged from administrative needs. Records of trade, taxation, and law required permanence. Writing transformed memory. History could now be preserved beyond human lifespan. Authority could extend across time and space. With writing came formal education. Knowledge concentrated among elites. Literacy became power.
Cities became centers of innovation. Mathematics developed for measurement, astronomy for calendars, engineering for construction, medicine for growing populations. Knowledge accelerated within urban environments. Yet cities also magnified suffering. Disease spreads quickly. Inequality created hardship. Slavery expanded as a labor solution. Human lives became resources within systems. Despite this, cities continued to grow, because cities offered something unmatched: scale. Scale of production, scale of defense, scale of culture, scale of memory. Civilization in its earliest form was not gentle. It was efficient, powerful, and demanding. Rural life fed cities. Cities ruled rural life. This imbalance defined early civilization. Empires rose from cities that mastered administration and force. Borders expanded. Cultures absorbed or erased others. Law replaced custom. Authority replaced consensus. Humanity entered a new phase. For the first time, individuals lived within systems larger than their understanding. Decisions were made far above daily life. Power became abstract. Yet civilization also preserved humanity. Knowledge survived disasters. Art carried meaning. Belief systems evolved. Trade connected distant peoples. Ideas crossed boundaries faster than ever before. Cities became humanity's memory and engine. They were fragile and resilient at once. Fires destroyed them. Floods drowned them. Wars leveled them. Yet cities were rebuilt again and again. Humanity could no longer imagine life without them. Civilization did not end suffering. It reorganized it. It did not eliminate violence. It systematized it. It did not create equality. It created structure. Cities were humanity's greatest creation and greatest burden, and once built, they could not be undone. The age of true civilization had begun.
As cities grew stronger and more organized, power no longer remained confined within walls. Cities needed land, resources, and security beyond their borders. What began as protection slowly turned into expansion. And expansion, once successful, rarely stopped. This was how empires were born. An empire did not begin as a dream of domination. It began as a solution. Cities needed more farmland to feed growing populations. They needed access to metals, timber, and water. They needed buffer zones to protect against rivals. Each conquest was justified as a necessity. Each victory made the next one easier. Power rewards itself. Early empires formed when one city gained enough military, economic, and administrative advantage to control others. Conquered cities were not always destroyed. Often they were absorbed. Their people paid taxes, provided labor, and followed new laws. Empires expanded not only through violence, but through organization. War changed shape. Earlier conflicts were short, local, and personal. Imperial warfare was planned, prolonged, and impersonal. Armies trained year-round. Weapons were standardized. Strategy replaced instinct. Commanders issued orders that affected thousands who would never meet them. Soldiers became instruments of the state. Empires required constant warfare to survive. Expansion fed wealth. Wealth funded armies. Armies secured expansion. This cycle made peace temporary and fragile. Even during calm periods, preparation for war never stopped. Victory brought resources, slaves, and prestige. Defeat meant collapse. Empires centralized power more aggressively than cities ever had. Kings became emperors. Authority stretched across vast territories. Rulers governed people they would never see, speaking languages they did not understand. To manage this scale, empires built systems. Roads connected distant regions. Messengers carried orders. Laws were standardized. Taxes were collected systematically. Bureaucracy expanded. Control became administrative as much as military. Empires depended on obedience. Religion adapted again. Gods became imperial. Rulers claimed divine mandate to rule entire worlds, not just cities. Loyalty to the empire became loyalty to sacred order.
Rebellion became sin. This belief strengthened control. Empires also reshaped identity. People no longer belonged only to tribes or cities, they belonged to empires. Citizenship became a concept. Rights and duties were defined by imperial law. Yet unity was fragile. Empires ruled over diverse cultures, traditions, and beliefs. Tolerance existed when it benefited stability. Suppression followed when difference threatened control. Assimilation became policy.
War was constant at the edges of the empire. Borders were unstable zones of conflict. Expansion pushed outward, resistance pushed back. Empires grew until the cost of control exceeded the benefits. At that point, they stagnated or collapsed. Despite violence, empires accelerated human development. Trade expanded dramatically. Goods moved across continents. Silk, spices, metals, and ideas traveled farther than ever before. Knowledge crossed cultural boundaries. Technology spread through conquest and exchange. Writing, mathematics, astronomy, and engineering advanced rapidly under imperial systems. Large-scale projects became possible. Roads, aqueducts, walls, and monuments reshaped landscapes. Empires built for eternity. Monuments symbolized power and permanence. Rulers sought immortality through stone and story. History was recorded to glorify victory and justify rule. But empires were fragile beneath their strength. They relied on constant extraction. Heavy taxation burdened populations. Slavery expanded to meet labor demands. Inequality deepened. Wealth concentrated at the top. Internal decay followed. Corruption weakened institutions. Leadership grew distant from reality. Armies demanded more resources. Citizens lost trust. Revolts became frequent. Empires often collapsed not from external invasion, but from internal strain. When central authority weakened, provinces broke away. Borders fell. Infrastructure decayed. Trade routes collapsed. Cities emptied. Yet collapse was never total. Empires left legacies. Laws influenced future systems. Languages spread. Religions endured. Roads remained. Knowledge survived. Humanity learned from the empire, even as it suffered under it. The desire to rule did not disappear after collapse. It returned in new forms. New empires rose from the ruins of old ones. Each believed it would be different. Each repeated familiar patterns. Why did humans build empires again and again? Because power offers certainty in an uncertain world. Because control feels like safety. Because ruling others promises stability even when it delivers violence. Empires simplified complexity by enforcing order. They replaced chaos with hierarchy. For many, this felt preferable to unpredictability. Yet the empire always demanded sacrifice. Lives were spent on borders. Cultures erased for unity. Freedom is exchanged for security. The human desire to rule was not born from cruelty alone. It emerged from fear, ambition, and imagination. Humans believed they could shape the world through domination. Sometimes they succeeded. But domination never ended conflict. It only changed its scale. As empires expanded, the world became more connected and more dangerous. Wars grew larger. Consequences reached farther. Humanity gained power faster than wisdom. Eventually, empires reached limits. They exhausted land. They exhausted people. They are exhausted. New forces emerged within them: philosophy, reform, resistance. The age of empire transformed humanity forever. It proved what humans could build at scale. It proved what humans would destroy for power. It revealed both genius and brutality. Empires fell, but the desire to rule remained. and it would shape every age that followed.
As empires expanded and societies grew more complex, humanity faced a quiet but fundamental problem. Memory was no longer enough. Oral tradition, once sufficient for small groups and villages, began to fail under the weight of cities, laws, trade, and empire. Too many people, too many transactions, too many decisions depended on accuracy. Civilization needed a way to remember beyond the limits of the human mind. This need gave birth to knowledge as a system. At first, knowledge was practical. It existed to solve immediate problems: how much grain was stored, who owed labor, when taxes were due, which land belonged to whom. Memory alone could no longer manage these details. Mistakes created conflict. Forgetting became dangerous. Early civilizations responded by marking information physically. Symbols were carved into clay, stone, or bone. Knots were tied into cords. Marks represented numbers, ownership, or obligation. These early systems were not language, they were reminders. Over time, reminders became records. Writing did not emerge to tell stories, it emerged to manage civilization. Clay tablets recorded grain shipments, symbols tracked livestock, marks represented debts and payments. Writing was born from bureaucracy. Its earliest purpose was control. But once symbols existed, their use expanded. Humans realized that marks could represent sounds, ideas, and events. Writing evolved slowly, becoming more flexible and expressive. Systems grew more refined. Alphabets and scripts developed independently across regions, shaped by culture and environment. With writing, knowledge escaped time. Information no longer depended on memory or presence. A decision made today could be enforced tomorrow. A law written once could govern generations. Authority became permanent. Writing transformed power. Rulers could issue commands across distance. Laws could be standardized. History could be shaped intentionally. What was written became the truth, even when reality disagreed. Writing also created hierarchy. Literacy was rare. Those who could read and write gained influence. Scribes, priests, and administrators became gatekeepers of knowledge. Information concentrated among elites. Control over writing meant control over reality. Knowledge became political. As writing spread, civilizations began recording more than transactions. They recorded myths, laws, rituals, and victories. History was preserved selectively. Triumphs were celebrated. Failures were minimized. Memory became curated. This was the beginning of official history. Yet writing also preserved ideas beyond power. Philosophical thought emerged. Humans began questioning existence, morality, and the nature of reality. Knowledge expanded beyond survival and control. Mathematics developed from trade and construction. Geometry shaped architecture. Astronomy organized calendars. Medicine evolved through observation and repetition. Knowledge became cumulative. Civilizations learned not only from experience, but from records. Libraries emerged as repositories of memory. Knowledge was collected, copied, and preserved. Scholars studied texts written centuries earlier. The past became accessible. This access changed how humans understood time. The present was no longer isolated. It existed within a continuum. Progress became visible. Mistakes could be avoided. Ideas could evolve. Yet preservation also created fragility. Written knowledge could be destroyed. Libraries burned. Records erased. When writing disappeared, civilizations forgot what they once knew. Collapse meant loss of memory. Throughout history, civilizations rose and fell, carrying knowledge with them. Some ideas survived, others vanished completely. Human progress was uneven, shaped by chance and survival. Religion played a critical role in preserving knowledge. Sacred texts were copied carefully. Ritual ensured repetition. Belief systems protect memory across generations. Even when empires collapsed, faith preserved language,
values, and stories. Education became formalized. Schools emerged for elites. Apprenticeships trained specialists. Knowledge passed deliberately rather than accidentally. Learning became structured, yet access remained limited. Most people lived without literacy. Knowledge was power held by few. This imbalance shaped society deeply. Ignorance was not natural, it was enforced. Writing also reshaped identity. People could now define themselves through recorded lineage, law, and citizenship. Contracts replaced trust. Documents replaced memory. Society became impersonal. This impersonal structure allowed scale. Large populations could be governed without personal relationships. Systems replaced empathy. Efficiency replaced familiarity. Knowledge made civilization possible at scale, but also distant. As trade expanded, ideas traveled. Writing allowed knowledge to move across borders. Cultures influenced one another through texts. Mathematics from one civilization shaped another. Philosophy crossed empires. Human thought became interconnected. Yet control over knowledge remained contested. Empires censored texts. Rulers destroyed inconvenient records. History was rewritten. Memory became a battlefield. Despite suppression, knowledge persisted. Scholars copied texts secretly. Ideas survived through translation. Even when civilizations collapsed, fragments endured, waiting to be rediscovered. Over centuries, writing transformed from administrative tool to cultural foundation. Poetry, literature, and philosophy flourished. Humans explored emotion, meaning, and imagination through text. Storytelling evolved. Written stories outlived their creators. Characters lived beyond generations. Humanity began conversing with itself across time. This changed self-awareness. Humans could reflect on their past consciously. They could critique ancestors. They could envision futures shaped by knowledge rather than fate. Yet written knowledge also deepened division. Those without access remained excluded. Literacy became a boundary. Education became a privilege. Inequality hardened. Knowledge could liberate or control. It built civilizations and justified oppression. It spread wisdom and preserved lies. It empowered reformers and strengthened tyrants. Throughout history, moments of knowledge expansion were followed by resistance. New ideas threatened established power. Progress provoked fear. Change met suppression. Still, knowledge advanced. Printing would later accelerate this process dramatically, but even before it, writing reshaped humanity fundamentally. Civilization became memory-dependent. Without records, systems collapsed. Without knowledge, progress stalled. Humanity learned that survival alone was not enough. Memory was survival. Knowledge became humanity's greatest inheritance. It allowed civilization to grow beyond instinct. It allowed learning across generations. It allowed humans to understand not just how to live, but why. Yet knowledge also revealed humanity's limits. The more humans learned, the more complexity they faced. Problems multiplied. Power expanded faster than wisdom. Responsibility grew heavier. Knowledge did not make humans peaceful. It made conflict more sophisticated. Wars were planned with mathematics. Empires justified themselves through ideology. Control became intellectual as well as physical. Still, knowledge endured. Even in collapse, memory survived. Even in darkness, ideas waited. Humanity carried fragments forward, rebuilding again and again. Writing gave humanity a voice that could not die. Civilization became a conversation across time. And once humans learned to remember deliberately, forgetting was no longer innocent. The future would be shaped not only by action, but by what humanity chose to remember. For most of human existence, life was simple in its purpose. Survival came first, and everything else followed. Humans woke each day needing food, safety, and warmth. There was little space for reflection. The present moment demanded attention, and the future remained vague and uncertain. Yet, across thousands of years, something gradual but irreversible happened. Humanity moved from surviving within the world to shaping it. This transformation did not happen because humans were wiser than nature. It happened because humans remembered. Memory changed behavior. Knowledge accumulated. Small adjustments repeated across generations created patterns. These patterns became systems. Systems became societies, and societies became civilizations. Civilization did not arrive as a finished idea. It emerged unevenly, shaped by geography, climate, and chance. Some groups settled early, others wandered longer. Some built cities, others resisted structure. Humanity experimented with ways of living, discarding some and reinforcing others. Over time, certain choices repeated. Settling replaced wandering. Farming replaced gathering. Villages replaced camps. Cities replaced villages. Empires replaced cities. Writing replaced memory. Law replaced custom. Belief replaced uncertainty. Each replacement solved a problem while creating new ones. Civilization allowed humans to live in larger numbers, to store food, to plan ahead, and to preserve knowledge. It reduced some dangers while amplifying others. Hunger became seasonal rather than constant. Violence became organized rather than random. Inequality became structured rather than accidental. Humans gained control over nature, but lost simplicity. As civilization advanced, daily life became less directly connected to survival. Many humans no longer hunted, farmed, or built shelter themselves. They relied on systems. Food came from fields they never saw. Water flowed through channels they did not maintain. Safety came from laws enforced by strangers. This dependence changed human psychology. Trust shifted from people to institutions. Survival depended less on instinct and more on compliance. Individuals became parts of larger mechanisms. Identity became layered: family, tribe, city, empire. Civilization demanded obedience. Rules governed behavior. Laws enforced order. Punishment maintained stability. Freedom narrowed in exchange for predictability. This trade became normal. Yet civilization also expanded possibility. Humans created art not for survival, but for meaning. Music, poetry, architecture, and philosophy emerged where food was secure. Thought extended beyond necessity. Humans asked not only how to live, but why. Civilization created time for reflection. Belief systems evolved alongside structure. Gods became more abstract. Morality became codified. Ethics expanded beyond immediate group survival. Concepts of justice, duty, and responsibility emerged. But belief also justified power. Civilization required hierarchy. Someone controlled the land. Someone enforced the law. Someone interpreted belief. Power concentrated. Inequality hardened. The distance between ruler and ruled widened.
Humanity accepted this imbalance because civilization delivered stability. Yet stability was fragile. Civilizations rose and fell repeatedly. Empires expanded, overreached, and collapsed. Cities burned, were rebuilt, and burned again. Knowledge survived unevenly. Memory fractured. Despite collapse, humanity never fully returned to its earliest state. Each cycle left traces, ideas, technologies, beliefs that carried forward. Civilization became cumulative. Humans learned that progress was not permanent.
Stability required maintenance. Systems decayed. Corruption spreads. Renewal demanded effort. This awareness shaped future societies. Civilization also revealed a contradiction at the heart of humanity. Humans sought control, yet created systems that controlled them. They desired security, yet accepted violence in its name. They valued knowledge, yet restricted access to it. Humanity became both builder and prisoner of its own creations. As civilization matured, individuals felt increasingly distant from decision-making. Power became abstract. Authority existed beyond personal understanding. Large systems governed lives silently. This distance created alienation, yet it also enabled scale. Humanity accomplished feats impossible for small groups. Massive structures rose, knowledge crossed continents, ideas survived centuries. Civilization preserved humanity beyond individual lifespan. Writing allowed humans to speak across time. Laws created continuity. Institutions outlived founders. Humanity extended itself beyond biology. But something was lost. Early humans lived within nature. Civilized humans lived above it. Nature became a resource rather than an environment. Exploitation replaced balance. This shift would shape future crises. Civilization taught humans to dominate, not coexist. At the same time, civilization made cooperation possible at unprecedented scale. Millions lived under shared rules. Trade connected distant cultures. Ideas mixed. Humanity became interconnected. Interconnection brought vulnerability. Disease spreads faster. Conflict escalated. Mistakes affected entire populations. Power concentrated dangerously. Civilization magnified both strength and weakness. By the time humanity reached advanced civilizations, survival was no longer the primary challenge. Meaning became the question. Humans asked what progress was for, why societies rose and fell, what made life worth preserving. Philosophy emerged as civilization reflecting on itself. Thinkers questioned power, morality, and purpose. They critiqued tradition and authority. Civilization began examining its own foundations. Yet these questions rarely reached everyone. Most humans lived within systems without shaping them. Knowledge remained uneven. Inequality persisted. Civilization created distance between potential and reality. Still, humanity continued forward, not because civilization was perfect, but because it was adaptable. When systems failed, new ones emerged. When beliefs collapsed, new interpretations formed. Humanity learned through repetition. Civilization was not a destination, it was a process. From survival to structure, from instinct to system, from memory to record, humanity reshaped itself. But beneath layers of law, belief, and power, the core remained unchanged. Humans still sought safety. Humans still feared uncertainty. Humans still desired belonging. Civilization changed the scale, not the nature, of human needs. In many ways, civilization solved the problem of survival while creating the problem of meaning. It extended life while complicating it. It preserved knowledge while distorting truth. Humanity became capable of extraordinary creation and extraordinary destruction. This is what humanity ultimately became, not peaceful, not unified, not complete, but complex. Civilization did not make humans better or worse, it amplified them. Every fear grew larger, every hope reached farther, every mistake echoed longer. From fire to city, from tribe to empire, from memory to writing, humanity built a world that reflected its inner contradictions. And that world continues to change. This was not the end of history, it was the center of it. Everything that follows, modern nations, global conflict, technology, and identity, grew from this foundation. Humanity survived. Humanity is organized. Humanity remembered. And in doing so, humanity became something larger than survival alone. Every empire, no matter how powerful it once appeared, eventually reached its limit. Some collapsed slowly, weakened by internal decay. Others fell suddenly, overwhelmed by invasion, famine, or disease. But when empires disappeared from maps and histories, the world did not end. Cities burned, borders vanished, rulers were forgotten, but life continued. What remained were people. When empires fell, the structures that once organized life broke apart. Laws lost authority. Roads fell into disrepair. Trade routes collapsed. Central power faded. The systems that had governed millions for generations dissolved, often within a single lifetime. For those living through these moments, the collapse felt like chaos. Yet collapse did not erase humanity. People woke up the next morning. They searched for food. They cared for children. They buried the dead. Life returned to simpler rhythms, even as memories of greatness lingered. Without an empire, communities shrank. Large cities emptied as people moved toward land they could work and defend. Grand buildings became ruins. Palaces turned into shelters for animals and families. Stone monuments stood silent, stripped of meaning by time. Power fragmented. Local leaders replaced distant rulers. Authority returned to familiarity. Villages governed themselves through custom rather than law. Survival depended less on institutions and more on cooperation. In many regions, people who once identified as citizens of empires now identified simply as neighbors. Identity narrowed. Loyalty became local. Memory of the empire lived mostly in stories told by elders, half-remembered and often exaggerated. Knowledge suffered. Writing declined where institutions collapsed. Literacy became rare. Records were lost or destroyed. Much of what civilizations had built vanished quietly. Skills survived unevenly. Some knowledge was preserved by chance. Other knowledge disappeared completely. This loss shaped the future. Human progress did not move forward in a straight line. It paused, retreated, and restarted. Periods of collapse were not empty ages, but quieter ones, less visible, less recorded, but deeply human. In the absence of empire, people reorganized life around necessity. Farming returned to a smaller scale. Trade became local. Craft replaced industry. Life slowed. Survival depended on seasonal rhythms rather than global systems. People lived closer to the land again, even if memories of the empire remained. Religion adapted. Large state-sponsored belief systems fractured. Organized rituals weakened. Faith became personal and local. People prayed for protection, rain, and health rather than imperial victory. Belief returned to comfort rather than control. Yet religion also preserved memory. Monasteries, temples, and isolated communities safeguarded fragments of knowledge. Texts were copied by hand. Stories were preserved through repetition. Faith carried history across centuries of uncertainty. Empires fell, but belief endured. Trade never fully disappeared. It shrank, adapted, and slowly reconnected distant regions. Travelers carried ideas along with goods. Languages mixed. Cultures blended quietly without imperial force. Over time, new centers emerged. Towns grew where trade returned. Markets reappeared. Authority reformed. Human organization rebuilt itself, not by restoring old empires exactly, but by adapting lessons learned. People remembered what had failed. They remembered overreach, heavy taxation, endless war. centralized power that ignored local reality. New systems formed more cautiously, shaped by memory of collapse. But memory fades. Generations passed. Children grew up hearing stories of ancient empires that felt distant and unreal. Ruins became landmarks rather than warnings. Humanity slowly repeated familiar patterns. Still, after every collapse, something changed permanently. People learned resilience. Communities that survived collapse became adaptable. They valued cooperation. They distrusted absolute power. They understood fragility. Collapse stripped civilization down to its core. Without empire, without law, without grand belief systems, humans were left with each other. Family, community, and shared labor mattered more than ideology. Life became personal again. People knew those they depended on. Responsibility was visible. Actions had immediate consequences. Survival was not abstract. This simplicity was not romantic. Life was harder, shorter, and more uncertain, but it was also more direct. History often calls these times dark, not because people lived without meaning, but because fewer records survived. Much of human experience went unrecorded, not unlived. The children still laughed. The elders still taught. Stories were still told by firelight. Humanity endured quietly. Over centuries, fragments of old civilizations resurfaced. Forgotten texts were rediscovered. Ancient ideas inspired new thought. Knowledge returned unevenly, shaped by interpretation rather than accuracy. Civilization rebuilt itself again. New empires rose. New rulers claimed legitimacy. Old patterns returned in new forms. Humanity moved forward carrying scars of the past, even when it no longer remembered their cause. Yet beneath cycles of rise and fall, one truth remained constant. Empires were temporary. People were not. Civilizations existed because people maintained them. When people stopped believing, obeying, or supporting them, they vanished. Power was never permanent. It survived only through participation. After empires fell, humanity returned to itself, to small communities, to shared labor, to quiet survival. These moments shaped human character as much as great victories did. Collapse taught humility. It reminded humanity that no structure was eternal, that control was fragile, that progress could be lost. This awareness lingered beneath future ambition. Even in the modern world, echoes of collapse remain. Ruins still stand, stories still warn. Fear of decline shapes decision-making.
Humanity remembers collapse more deeply than success, because collapse is personal. It affects daily life. It changes how people eat, move, and trust. After empires fell, people learned to rebuild without certainty. They adapted, they endured. History often focuses on rulers, wars, and monuments, but between those moments lived generations of ordinary people whose names were never written, whose lives sustained humanity quietly. They farmed, they raised children, they cared for the sick, they passed on memory through stories. They were history, even when history forgot them. Empires rose and fell above them, but people remained below, shaping the world slowly, patiently. This was humanity's true continuity, not power, not conquest, not an empire, but people, a living, adapting, and surviving through change. After the empires fell, the world did not reset. It softened, it quieted, it waited, and humanity continued forward, one generation at a time. History often speaks in loud moments. It remembers battles, crowns, laws, and the names of rulers carved into stone. But beneath these visible events lived another history, quieter and far more constant. This was the history of ordinary people,
people whose names were never written, people who did not command armies or rule cities. Yet it was their lives, repeated endlessly across generations, that shaped humanity more deeply than any empire ever could. Most humans who have ever lived were not kings, generals, or scholars. They were farmers, builders, parents, craftsmen, traders, healers, and children. Their days followed simple rhythms. They woke, worked, ate, rested, and slept. They worried about food, weather, illness, and family. They made small decisions that never appeared in records but accumulated over time into lasting change. These ordinary lives carried history forward quietly. When empires collapsed, it was not rulers who rebuilt the world. It was people returning to fields, repairing shelters, sharing tools, and teaching children what they remembered. Survival did not depend on grand ideas. It depended on habit, on knowing when to plant, where to find water, how to treat wounds, and how to live together. Habits became inheritance. Knowledge passed from parent to child through observation rather than instruction. A child learned when to sow seeds by watching the sky, learned how to shape tools by copying hands, learned how to behave by absorbing daily interaction. This slow transmission preserved humanity when formal systems failed. Ordinary people adapt constantly. When the climate shifted, they adjusted crops. When land grew tired, they moved fields. When trade disappeared, they relied on local skills. When authority vanished, they formed new customs. This adaptation was not dramatic, it was practical. History rarely records adaptation because it leaves no monuments. Yet adaptation shaped the long-term direction of humanity more than conquest ever did. In times of peace, ordinary lives created stability. People built relationships across families and communities. They exchanged goods, stories, and skills. Trust formed slowly. Social bonds strengthened. These quiet connections held societies together, even when institutions weakened. Marriage linked families. Friendship linked villages. Trade linked regions. These connections survived rulers and borders. Women, in particular, shaped history invisibly. They managed households, preserved food, raised children, and passed on values. They were healers, midwives, teachers, and storytellers. Through care and continuity, they preserved culture across generations. While rarely recorded, their influence was constant. Children carried history forward unknowingly. They absorbed language, belief, and behavior before they understood them. They grew into the next generation, shaped by what they saw rather than what they were told. In this way, culture reproduced itself quietly. Even rebellion often began quietly. Before revolutions, people complained softly. They adjusted behavior. They resisted small demands. They shared dissatisfaction in private spaces. Change emerged from accumulation, not explosion. Most historical transformations did not start with speeches. They started with fatigue. Fatigue from injustice, fatigue from hunger, fatigue from fear. Ordinary lives reached limits, and systems changed in response. Technology also advanced through ordinary use. Tools were refined by repetition. Farmers improved plows not through theory, but through daily struggle. Builders adjusted designs through trial and error. Crafts evolved through practice. Innovation often came from necessity, not ambition. Even great inventions depended on ordinary adoption. A tool changed history only when people used it consistently. Writing mattered because people copied texts. Money mattered because people accepted it. Laws mattered because people followed them. Systems existed only through participation.
Ordinary people gave systems life. When belief systems evolved, it was not only through priests or prophets, it was through daily ritual, through repetition of prayer, custom, and story. Faith survived because it comforted ordinary lives, not because it impressed rulers.
Religion spread through kitchens and fields as much as temples. Ordinary people also preserved memory. Stories told by firelight carried history through generations. Myths changed slightly with each telling, adapting to context. These stories taught lessons about danger, cooperation, and morality. Memory lives in voice, not record. When writing returned after periods of collapse, it often drew from oral tradition. The quiet memory of ordinary people shaped written history. Language itself evolved through ordinary use. Words changed meaning slowly. Accents shifted. New expressions appeared. Language adapted to life, not design. Through daily speech, humans reshaped how they thought and communicated. Migration followed ordinary needs. People moved not to shape history, but to survive. They followed land, water, work, and safety. These movements mixed cultures, spread ideas, and reshaped populations. Borders shifted quietly before they were ever drawn. History often labels these movements as invasions or migrations, but for individuals, they were personal decisions: to leave hunger, to escape danger, to seek opportunity. Ordinary motives created extraordinary change. Trade, too, depended on ordinary trust. Merchants relied on reputation. Deals were sealed through familiarity. Markets functioned because people returned. Trust built slowly through repeated interaction. Without it, trade collapsed. Economies were not abstract systems. They were in a relationship. Even morality emerged from ordinary life. Rules developed to manage daily interaction: what was fair, what was acceptable, what required punishment. These judgments came from experience, not theory. Ethics grew from living together. Philosophy later formalized these ideas, but ordinary lives shaped them first. Suffering also shaped history quietly. Famine taught restraint. Disease taught hygiene. Loss taught caution. Trauma changed behavior across generations. Memory of hardship influenced decision-making long after events passed. These lessons were rarely written, but deeply remembered. Ordinary people also resisted dehumanization. In systems that treated individuals as resources, people maintained dignity through small acts, through family, humor, creativity, and care. Humanity persisted in spaces that history overlooked. Art often emerged from ordinary life: songs sung during work, patterns woven into cloth, designs carved into tools. Creativity was not reserved for elites. It lived in daily expression. These expressions preserved identity when power tried to erase it. Even silence shaped history: what people chose not to say, what they endured, what they avoided. Silence preserved safety, but also delayed change. Over time, silence accumulated pressure. History often moves when silence breaks, but silence itself is history. As centuries passed, layers of ordinary life built foundations beneath visible events. Empires rose on land prepared by farmers. Cities relied on laborers. Knowledge survived through copyists. Power depended on compliance. Ordinary lives were the unseen engine of civilization. Without them, nothing endured. History tends to remember the exceptional, but the exceptional mattered only because the ordinary made it possible. When looking back, it may seem that humanity was shaped by great moments, but lived forward, history felt slow, repetitive, and personal. People did not know they were shaping history. They were just living. They loved it. They feared. They hoped. They made choices that felt small, and those choices accumulated quietly, patiently, endlessly. This is how history truly moved, not in sudden leaps, but in steady steps, not through the will of a few, but through the lives of many. As humanity continued forward, ordinary lives remained its foundation. No matter how complex systems became, they rested on daily action. History was not only what happened to people, it was what people did every day. and it is still being shaped the same way. As humanity moved forward through centuries of rebuilding, expansion, and change, a quiet pattern became visible. It was not obvious while living through it, but clear when viewed slowly across time. Human history did not move in a straight line. It moved in cycles. Progress rose, suffering followed, lessons were learned, and then slowly forgotten, and the cycle began again. Every generation believed it was different. People believed they were smarter than those who came before, more advanced, more civilized. New tools, new ideas, and new systems created confidence. Humanity felt closer to control, closer to stability, closer to permanence. Yet beneath this confidence, familiar problems remained. Scarcity returned in new forms. Power concentrated again. Inequality deepened once more. Progress solved old problems while creating new ones. When technology improved farming, populations grew. When populations grew, resources strained. When resources strained, conflict followed. When conflict destroyed systems, people rebuilt, often repeating the same structures with slight changes. This repetition was not a failure, it was human nature. Humans learned through experience, but memory faded across generations. What one generation endured painfully, the next inherited comfortably. Comfort softened caution. Systems that once felt dangerous began to feel normal. Risk became invisible. This is how suffering returned. Empires promised order and peace, but delivered war and control. New governments promised fairness, but produced hierarchy. Economic growth promised abundance, but created dependence and inequality. Each solution carried its own cost. Yet humanity continued to pursue progress because progress felt like hope. Progress suggested that suffering could be reduced, if not eliminated, that life could become easier, longer, safer. This belief drove innovation. Tools improved, medicine advanced, knowledge expanded, life expectancy slowly increased, but suffering did not disappear, it shifted. Physical suffering lessened in some areas, while psychological suffering grew. Hunger declined in some regions, while loneliness increased. Violence became less personal, but more destructive. Progress changed the form of pain, not its presence. Humans adapted again. They learned to live within new systems. They adjusted expectations. They normalized new stresses. What once felt unbearable became routine. Humanity recalibrated its sense of normal. This adaptation allowed survival, but also acceptance. Many injustices persisted, not because people supported them, but because they learned to live around them. Suffering that was slow and constant became invisible. History records moments of dramatic change, but much of suffering was quiet. It lived in daily exhaustion, in unspoken fear, in quiet resignation. These experiences rarely entered records, yet they shaped behavior deeply. As progress advanced, humanity also developed new ways to justify suffering. Economic systems framed inequality as necessity. Political systems framed control as stability. Belief systems frame hardship as a moral lesson or destiny. Explanations softened discomfort. People accepted suffering more easily when it felt meaningful. This acceptance allowed systems to endure longer than they should have. It also delayed reform. Change often came only when suffering crossed a threshold, when it became impossible to ignore. Then history moved quickly. Revolutions erupted, empires fell, systems collapsed, new orders formed, hope returned, progress restarted, and the cycle continued.
Despite repetition, humanity did not remain static. Each cycle left traces. Knowledge accumulated unevenly. Ethical awareness expanded slowly. Some lessons endured, Slavery, once widespread, became questioned. Absolute monarchy weakened. Rights expanded gradually. These changes did not eliminate injustice, but reshaped it. Progress was real, but incomplete. Human psychology remained largely unchanged. Fear, desire, ambition, and belonging continued to drive behavior. Technology magnified these impulses rather than replacing them. Power still attracted those who sought control. Wealth is still concentrated. Groups still divided themselves into us and them. Fear still justified violence. The human pattern repeated because humans repeated themselves. Yet within repetition existed variation. Some individuals resisted cycles. They questioned authority. They imagined alternatives. They documented suffering. They advocated compassion. Their influence was often small at first, but cumulative. Ideas mattered. Philosophies emerged that challenged domination. Ethical systems emphasized empathy. Spiritual traditions taught restraint. These ideas did not end suffering, but they shaped conscience. Humanity slowly became aware of itself. This awareness did not prevent harm, but it created discomfort around it. Actions that once felt normal began to feel wrong. This discomfort fueled change. Progress often began as discomfort. Still, suffering remained part of human experience. Disease, loss, and uncertainty could not be fully eliminated. Civilization reduced some risks while introducing others. Humans learned to manage risk, not escape it. As systems grew larger and more complex, individuals felt smaller. Power became distant. Responsibility blurred. People felt acted upon rather than acting. This created anxiety. To cope, humans sought meaning again, through belief, identity, work, and connection. Meaning softened suffering. It did not remove it. History shows that humans endure suffering better when it feels shared. Isolation intensified pain. The community eased it. This is why after every collapse, people rebuilt social bonds first. Throughout history, periods of greatest progress often coincided with periods of greatest suffering. Industrialization improved productivity while exploiting labor. Scientific advancement cured disease while enabling destruction. Global connection spreads knowledge while spreading conflict. Progress was never purely benevolent, yet humanity continued forward, because stopping meant stagnation, and stagnation felt like death. Humans preferred flawed progress to stillness. The repeating pattern was not simply progress followed by suffering, it was hope followed by disappointment, followed by adjustment. Humanity recalibrated expectations again and again. This recalibration shaped resilience. Humans learned to survive disappointment. They learned to rebuild after loss. They learned to carry memory forward selectively. Some memories faded intentionally. Others remained vivid. Trauma influenced culture long after events passed. History is filled with echoes of unresolved suffering. Yet humanity also demonstrated remarkable endurance. People adapted to environments once thought uninhabitable. They rebuilt cities after devastation. They preserved knowledge through collapse. The human pattern repeated, but not identically. Each repetition occurred at a different scale. Each cycle involved more people, more resources, more consequences. Humanity's impact on itself and the world grew larger. This increased the stakes. Mistakes became global. Suffering reached farther. Responsibility grew heavier. Humanity began to sense this weight. In recent centuries, awareness of global consequences emerged. Actions in one region affected others. Progress could no longer be isolated. Neither could suffering. This awareness created tension. Humans were powerful enough to change the world, but not wise enough to agree on how.
Progress accelerated faster than ethical consensus. The pattern intensified, yet within this tension lay possibility. If humans could recognize their patterns, perhaps they could interrupt them. History offered warning signs. Memory provided guidance. Whether humanity would learn remained uncertain. History does not guarantee improvement. It only offers opportunity. The repeating pattern of progress and suffering is not destiny. It is a tendency. Tendencies can change, slowly and imperfectly. Humanity has never escaped its nature, but it has reshaped its expression. The same impulses that created empires also created art. The same desire for control that caused war also built hospitals. The same fear that fueled violence also inspired protection. Humans are not defined by a single pattern, but by tension between many. As history continued, this tension remained unresolved. Progress had advanced, suffering followed, reflection emerged, change occurred, and the cycle moved on, quietly, relentlessly, humanly. This was not a story of failure, it was a story of persistence. Humanity continued not because it perfected itself, but because it adapted. And as long as humans lived, thought, and remembered, the pattern would continue, shaped by choice, constrained by nature, and softened by reflection. The repetition of history was not meaningless, it was the rhythm of human existence. The modern world feels different from everything that came before it. Life moves faster, information travels instantly, distance feels smaller, time feels compressed. Days pass quickly, sometimes without being noticed. Humanity often believes it has entered an entirely new era, separate from all of history that came before. And yet, beneath the speed and surface, something familiar remains. The modern world did not appear suddenly. It formed slowly, layer by layer, built upon centuries of accumulated change. New technologies emerged, but old patterns remained. New systems developed, but human behavior followed recognizable rhythms. What changed most was pace. Where earlier generations waited weeks for news, modern humans receive information in moments. Where travel once required months, it now takes hours. Where knowledge was scarce, it is now overwhelming. This acceleration reshaped daily experience. Time itself feels different. The future arrives faster than expected. The present feels shorter. The past feels distant, even when it is recent. Humanity lives in a constant state of transition, rarely pausing long enough to settle. Yet, humans remain human. Modern life still revolves around basic needs: food, shelter, safety, belonging. The methods have changed, but the desires have not. People still seek stability. They still fear loss. They still hope for meaning. Cities grew larger than ever before. Urban centers expanded upward and outward, filled with millions of lives layered together. Streets pulse with movement. Buildings rise like monuments to speed and efficiency. The city never fully rests. And still, within these vast systems, individuals live ordinary lives. They wake, work, eat, rest, and sleep. They worry about health, relationships, and security. They celebrate small joys. They endure quiet disappointments. Daily life continues much as it always has, just surrounded by more noise and light. Technology promised ease. Machines reduced physical labor. Automation increased productivity. Medicine extended life. Communication bridged distance. Humanity gained control over many forces that once caused fear. But ease brought complexity. Modern systems require constant maintenance. Electricity must flow. Networks must function. Supply chains must remain intact. Life depends on layers of infrastructure invisible to most people. This dependence creates vulnerability. A disruption in one place affects many others. A failure spreads quickly. The modern world is efficient, but fragile. Work changed shape. For many, labor moved away from fields and workshops into offices, factories, and digital spaces. Physical exhaustion gave way to mental strain. Repetition remained, but its form shifted. Time became scheduled, measured, optimized. Productivity became value. Rest became something to earn rather than assume. Humans adapted, as they always do. They learned new skills, they adjusted expectations, they normalized pressure. What once felt overwhelming became routine. The pace accelerated again. Information flooded daily life. News arrived constantly. Stories overlapped. Attention fragmented. Humans encountered suffering from distant places without the ability to respond. Empathy stretched thin. This constant exposure changed perception. Tragedy became familiar. Urgency became background noise. Meaning became harder to hold. And yet, humans still searched for connection. They formed communities, both physical and virtual. They shared stories, images, and emotions across vast distances. They sought recognition and belonging. The desire to be seen remained unchanged.
Identity became more fluid and more fragile at the same time. People defined themselves through work, belief, culture, and expression. Choice expanded. So did uncertainty. Modern life offers freedom, but also responsibility. The weight of choice increased. Paths multiplied. Comparison became constant. Satisfaction became elusive. Despite this, patterns repeated. Wealth concentrated. Power centralized. Inequality persisted. Progress benefited some more than others. The old structures reappeared in new forms. Corporations replaced empires. Systems replaced rulers. Authority became abstract again. Yet resistance followed. People questioned systems. They demanded fairness. They sought reform. Voices rose, fell, and rose again. Change occurred slowly, unevenly. History continued its rhythm. War did not disappear. It transformed. Technology amplified destruction. Distance increased, but consequences reached farther. Conflicts became global in impact. At the same time, cooperation expanded. Nations collaborated. Knowledge was shared. Science advanced rapidly. Humanity achieved feats once unimaginable. The modern world held contradictions, extraordinary progress alongside persistent suffering, comfort alongside anxiety, connection alongside loneliness. Humans lived longer, but worried more. The pace of life reduces space for reflection. Silence became rare. Stillness felt uncomfortable. Many filled quiet moments with distraction. Yet when quiet did arrive, familiar questions returned. Who am I? What matters? What comes next? These questions have followed humanity since the beginning. Modern belief systems shifted again. Traditional faith weakened in some places, strengthened in others. New forms of meaning emerged. Ideologies, identities, and values filled gaps once occupied by religion. Humans continued to seek explanation and purpose. Science offered understanding, but not comfort. Data explained how, but not why. Meaning remained personal. Art adapted. Music, literature, and visual expression reflected modern tension. Creativity responded to speed, fragmentation, and uncertainty. Beauty persisted, though its forms changed. Memory expanded digitally. Humanity has recorded more than ever before. Images, messages, and records multiplied endlessly. The present became archived instantly. Yet abundance diluted significance. With so much preserved, deciding what mattered became difficult. Memory risked becoming noise. Still, humans remembered selectively. They remembered love. They remembered the loss. They remembered moments that felt real. Despite technology,
Memory remained emotional. The modern world also confronted its impact on the planet. Human activity reshaped climate, land, and ecosystems. The scale of influence exceeded anything before. Humanity became aware that it could alter the conditions of its own survival. This awareness created anxiety and responsibility. For the first time, progress required restraint. The future felt uncertain again. And so, the modern world began to resemble earlier times in feeling, if not in form. Fear returned, hope persisted, adaptation continued. Humans adjusted expectations once more. They sought balance between speed and meaning, between connection and solitude, between progress and preservation. Some succeeded briefly, others struggled. History did not end in the modern world, it intensified. The same patterns appeared faster, consequences arrived sooner, feedback loops shortened, yet humanity still moved forward, one day at a time. People woke up, they worked, they loved, they worried, they slept. Life remained personal. Behind headlines and systems, ordinary lives continued shaping the future quietly. Parents raised children, friends supported one another, strangers showed kindness, small choices accumulated. The modern world felt overwhelming, but it was built from familiar elements: fear and hope, control and uncertainty, connection and isolation. Faster than ever, yet strangely familiar. This familiarity offered comfort. It reminded humanity that change did not erase its nature, it only reshaped expressions. Humans remained adaptable, reflective, and resilient. As the modern world continued accelerating, the question was no longer whether humanity could move faster, but whether it could move wisely. History offered no guarantee, only perspective. And perspective arrived slowly, often in quiet moments when speed paused, moments before sleep, moments of stillness. In those moments, the modern world softened. It became part of a longer story, a story still unfolding.
Humanity's journey has never truly had an ending. It has moved forward slowly, sometimes confidently, sometimes blindly, shaped by countless decisions made by ordinary people living ordinary lives. From the earliest moments of survival to the complexity of the modern world, the path has not been straight and it has never been certain. Looking back across thousands of years, it becomes clear that humanity did not travel toward a fixed destination. It wandered, adapted, paused, collapsed, rebuilt, and continued. Each generation inherited a world shaped by those before it and added its own layer, often without realizing the long-term consequences. This journey was never guided by a single plan. Humans responded to what was in front of them. Hunger shaped movement, fear shaped shelter, curiosity shaped tools, memory shaped culture, power shaped systems, suffering shaped reflection, progress shaped expectations. At every stage, humans believed they were solving problems, and at every stage, new problems emerged. The earliest humans wanted safety. They found fire. They wanted food security. They found farming. They wanted order. They found law. They wanted meaning. They found belief. They wanted stability. They found civilization. Each discovery carried both promise and cost. Over time, humanity became skilled at building structures larger than itself. Cities rose, empires stretched across continents, knowledge accumulated, technology accelerated. The human footprint expanded far beyond what early ancestors could have imagined. Yet beneath all this growth, the human experience remained intimate. People still experienced birth and death, love and loss, hope and disappointment, fear and comfort.
These experiences did not change even as the world around them transformed. History often focuses on change, but continuity is what sustains humanity. After every collapse, people adapted. When systems failed, communities reorganized. When belief fractured, new meaning emerged. When certainty disappeared, humans learned to live with uncertainty again. This adaptability was humanity's greatest strength. The long journey was not made by heroes alone. It was carried forward by people who woke each morning and did what was necessary. They planted crops, they raised children, they cared for one another. They passed on stories, skills, and values without knowing how far those memories would travel. Time moved quietly for them. Days blended into seasons, seasons into years, years into lifetimes. History unfolded not as dramatic moments, but as accumulated habits. Civilizations rose because people maintained them daily. Civilizations fell when people could no longer support them. Power was never abstract, it was always lived.
As humanity moved into the modern age, the scale of consequence grew. Actions reached farther. Mistakes affected more lives. The planet itself became part of the story. Humans became aware that their journey did not exist apart from the world that carried them. This awareness arrived slowly and unevenly. Some listened, some resisted, some denied. Humanity continued forward without full agreement, just as it always had. The future began to feel open again, not open with optimism, but open with uncertainty. Old answers felt incomplete. New answers felt unstable. Humanity stood between what it had been and what it might become. And yet, even here, the pattern felt familiar. Uncertainty had always been part of the journey. Early humans did not know if food would come. Settled humans did not know if crops would survive. Civilized humans did not know if systems would endure. Uncertainty never disappeared, it only changed form. What changed was awareness. Humanity became capable of reflecting on its own path. It could look backward and recognize patterns. It could imagine futures shaped by choice rather than accident. This ability did not guarantee wisdom, but it offered possibility. The long journey revealed that humanity was not defined by perfection, but by persistence. Humans did not succeed because they avoided failure. They succeeded because they survived it. Each generation learned something, even if it forgot much else. Knowledge moved unevenly, but it moved. Ethics expanded slowly, but they expanded. Compassion appeared, disappeared, and returned in new forms. The journey was unfinished because humanity was unfinished. No system solved every problem. No belief answered every question. No progress removed every fear. But each attempt added depth to human understanding. Humanity learned that control was limited, that power was temporary, that certainty was fragile. These lessons returned repeatedly, carved into memory by experience. And still, humans continued to build. They built homes knowing they might be lost. They formed relationships knowing they would end. They created meaning knowing it would change. This willingness to continue despite impermanence was at the heart of the human journey. The long journey was not about reaching an end point. It was about learning how to live within change. As the present moment arrived, humanity carried everything that came before it. Every fire tended, every seed planted, every story is told, every mistake made, every kindness offered. Nothing was truly lost. It was transformed. The future remained unwritten, not because humanity lacked knowledge, but because choice still existed. The path ahead would be shaped not by destiny, but by decisions made quietly, daily, by people living ordinary lives. The journey continued in classrooms and kitchens, in cities and villages,
in conversations and silences, in moments of care and moments of neglect. History did not end. It slowed here at the edge of reflection, a pause before the next movement. Humanity rested briefly, carrying its long memory, its unresolved questions, and its quiet hope forward. The long journey remained unfinished, and perhaps it always would be.